Hello and welcome to Comic Boom, the comics and education podcast. If you're interested in hearing more about the crossover between comics and education, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Lucy Starbuck-Braidley, and each week I'll be joined by a fellow educator, an academic, a librarian or a creator of comics to discuss their journey into comics and provide some inspiration to influence your practice. And hopefully shine some light on some titles you can bring into your libraries, classrooms, and hopefully onto your bookshelves at home too. This episode of Comic Boom is sponsored by ALCS, the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society. And this episode is also the first of a two-part special, so very excited about that. We're focusing on the Flying Eye title, Detective Stanley, Mystery at the Museum. So in the first episode, we're going to meet the creators of the book, and in the second, we're going to meet the sales, marketing and editorial team at Flying Eye to talk about more the business side of bringing a comic into the world from their perspective. So that's going to be really interesting. Detective Stanley, Mystery at the Museum, is a graphic reader aimed at sort of 5 to 8 year olds, I would say. A beautiful, beautiful book. It's created by a New Zealand-based duo, Hannah Tunnicliffe and Erica Harrison, who join us on the podcast today. Hannah is an author, essayist, podcaster, yes, speaker and mental health advocate. She's written fiction for adults with titles like The Season of Salt and Honey, The Colour of Tea, and A French Wedding. Detective Stanley and the Mystery at the Museum is her first book for children. It's a graphic reader with illustrations by the very talented Erica Harrison. We dig in a little bit to what a graphic reader actually is in this episode. So if you're not familiar with that term, don't worry, it will become clear. Erica joins us for the episode. She's a designer, illustrator and printmaker with decades of experience in designing and illustrating children's fiction. Loads to learn from Erica, and then they're just a great creative duo and lovely to speak to. This book is very, very stylish. It's got such a cool look to it. There'll be a link in the show notes for you to click through and have a little look at it because it's, definitely got a very distinctive style in both the storytelling and the imagery as well. But here's what Hannah and Erica had to say. Hello, Hannah and Erica, and welcome to Comic Boom.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming onto the show. First of all, I always start the podcast by asking guests to tell us a little bit about their journey as a reader. I don't know if you were comics readers as children. Hannah, can you start us off? How did you become a writer for comics? Where did that interest come from? Can you tell us a little bit about your reading diet as a child?
My reading diet. I love it. I didn't actually read a lot of comics as a kid. I was thinking about this previously, and I think possibly because a lot of them seem to be aimed at boys. And, you had protagonists like Tintin and Asterix. And I think when I look back on it, I actually really liked female protagonists and I was drawn to them the most. And I didn't really see a lot of them in comics, and just comics in general seemed to be sort of dominated by the boys and didn't seem to be kind of a zone for me. So I think, as a kid, I was really into female protagonists, whether it was like Charlotte's Web or Anne of Green Gables, Babysitter's Club, Famous Five, that kind of thing, where there were girls in the books doing cool stuff. And so for me, it wasn't until I was an adult, I was thinking back, I think my first graphic novel was Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, which I absolutely adored. And then I kind of devoured a lot of Lucy Nicely, Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, Mouse, and got really into graphic novels. So yeah, I was a late bloomer, a late something to the comic and graphic novel world. But I'd like to think that that's not the case I've got 3 daughters, and I don't think that's the case for them. A lot of them have read the graphic novels of the Babysitter's Club, they've read Smile and Guts, and they see there's much more of a world for them as girls in the comics space now, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's, for me as well, and my reading diet now is really focused on sort of women's stories, and there seems to be more like the Raina Telgemeier books you were just talking about, those kind of autobiographical, real world stories with female protagonists in definitely seems to have increased. Erica, how about you? What was your
I would
story?
say quite similar, but Yeah, definitely female protagonists. I was obsessed with anything Enid Blyton. So I started with The Faraway Tree and read every single one of those. And then I think I moved on to Secret Seven, read every single one of those, then Famous Five. Then it was Mallory Towers. So for me, that was my reading diet. I love that we're calling it that. And
just a normal term, thank you.
My brother was what we would definitely call a reluctant reader, which is kind of interesting because that's where we're aiming our books at. And so his reading material was the Beano and the Dandy. And he couldn't really digest anything bigger format, longer format, or was interested in anything that looked like a book. So for my mum and dad, like those comics were a bit of a savior because my brother devoured them. Like, so he would get his weekly Beano on a Friday and that would keep him going for the week. So that was how he learned to love to read in his way. So I've always had comics in the house, but would never really read them myself, but would totally
Didn't form part of your sort of identity.
Not really, no. But I kind of loved the characters from those comics because of his love for the Beano. So more recently, comics have come into my life because of my daughter, and possibly my first real introduction to Flying Eye books was through her with Hilda. So I have read and loved Hilda with Mabel, and
I love Hilda more than my children, I think it's fair to say.
I do too.
I think she's
she
epic.
Absolutely loves Hilda. She loves the comic versions and she also loves now the TV show, and she has rewatched the whole show twice now, all of the seasons. So my love for comics has now come with her, and she is now obviously onto much more kind of like wordier, lengthier graphic novels, and she gets through them so quickly. And my love for those just grows, and that format and that way of telling a story. So it was really exciting to get to do that with Stanley.
Yeah, exactly. Which we are going to come on to. I'm just going to hold off for a little bit longer though before we start talking about Stanley, which has been very popular in my house to say. Talk a little bit, Erica, about your journey to becoming an illustrator, and just thinking we could tie that into thinking about education and what role did school or home as you were growing up come into that, you being able to see yourself in that role? Because I think that's something that can be really challenging for children, to see themselves as somebody that creates books, because they just appear as an item on the shelf and you don't necessarily think about the people that are making them. So I'm just really interested in how that journey.
Well, I don't think I thought about how people were making them when I love to draw. And I think my love for drawing probably came about around the same time that those Beano and Dandy comics were coming into my house. And at the time as well, like The Simpsons was just really kicking off. So I was drawing cartoon characters based on either comics or those cartoons. And so I remember I started drawing characters for money at school. I would draw Simpsons characters.
I love these stories of entrepreneurial children. I never did anything for money.
I don't even know how
that's
came about. I started drawing Simpsons characters for 20p a time. So people would ask for a Homer or a Marge or a Lisa, and I would just copy. I think my brother might have been getting the collector cards for them or something, and so I would copy those in a bigger format and sell them for 20 pence. So, and then excellent. I think my love of drawing was obviously nurtured a lot at home. Like there was always lots of drawing materials, and my mum and dad weren't artists. My dad is a terrible drawer. My mum probably is better, but it wasn't like I was learning to draw from her. I had lots of how to draw books at home, so I used to copy from those. And then I had an amazing teacher in the last couple of years of primary school. She joined our school and she was an art-based primary school teacher. So she had trained as an artist herself and then used loads of it in her lessons. So anything we were studying would have an element of creating something in order to learn about something. So if it was a history project, we'd do big posters that would go on the wall and like make these large kind of like diagrams, or I don't know, crowns for something historical. Or so I really remember her making the lessons fun through art. So I've always been nurtured, I guess, through teaching. And then at high school, I think I just suddenly realised I could draw. And so like really draw. And so I learned to paint, and I was doing kind of portrait paintings and things by the time I was leaving high school. And then I studied art at A level and had two amazing art teachers. And at that point, I was really going towards probably fine arts and thinking I was going to be a painter. And then I went and did my art foundation at Norwich School of Art, and still thinking I was going to be a fine artist. But I think I realised I didn't quite fit that mould and was maybe taking things too literally with projects. And I didn't have quite the, I don't know, artistic thinking behind the projects that would get me where I kind of would need to go if I was to really focus on that. And I just, when at art college, they kind of rotate what areas you study. And so at that point, I started doing graphic arts for the first time. And it wasn't anything that I had even realised was a thing until Art Foundation. And for one of those graphic art projects, an illustrator and a paper engineer came and did a project with us called Robert Crowther. And he does these amazing ABC children's pop-up books. And he set us a project. I think it was a 2-week project, art school, to create these paper engineered children's illustrated spreads. And kind of something clicked then that was like, I could draw, and I could draw for children, and I'm good at it. And it could maybe be a job, without realizing that it ever was one until then. And at the end of the project, like, he kind of like assessed what we'd done and brought up some of the pieces, and he showcased my piece that I'd done that week. And I will never forget it. He said to the class that he had no doubt that at some point in my life I would draw for children for a living. So that was an amazing boost. And it was then that I realised that I should move from thinking about fine arts and studying graphic arts. So I did graphic arts at Leeds Metropolitan University, and I specialised in children's illustration from the moment I got there, and learned to bookbind and learned typography, and came out knowing that I wanted to be a children's book designer and illustrator, but still not really realising that that could be a job, but hoping it was. And then at the end of my course, I started reading the ads in the Guardian. Like, there used to be a big thing at that point. There used to be a supplement thing that came out on a Tuesday that told you all the creative jobs in the industry. And I applied for 2 jobs, didn't get the first one, but did get my second, which was children's book designer at Osborne Publishing. So that was the start of my career.
Amazing.
And even then, I still didn't realise that I was like, oh, I wonder what I'll be doing there. Maybe they'll get me doing some photocopying, or, you know, like just helping out. And like within my first week, I'm kind of making things for a fairy make and do book out of toilet rolls and boxes and glitter. And so, yeah, that
sounds like a great job.
It was an incredible job. It exists, and that is actually a thing. You can go into a place of work, a serious office in London, and there will be somebody at a desk somewhere making bits and pieces out of stuff you can find around the home. So yeah, that was how I got into it. But I wouldn't have known, like, who would think that that's a job?
Yeah.
So it's kind of just like
exactly.
a series of events that took me there, and I was incredibly lucky to get that job.
It sounds like there's been some really inspirational people along the way as well, that's really nice to hear. That, and just to know that, because it's the sort of thing that you, like when you're leading a class, you don't really realise the things that you say or the validation that you give people and the impact it can have. It's really
amazingly so.
Really
that one comment changed the course of my art career. I think really it made me realise that what I was good at wasn't what I realised I was good at until somebody told me. So yeah, it was important.
Yeah. And Hannah, what about you and writing? Was being a writer something that you visualised as a child?
I mean, I'm just trying to get over Erica's 20p per Simpsons illustration.
Were you writing stories for people? Because if you weren't,
I just wished, Erica, that we'd known each other as kids, because I feel like we really could have just sewn up the whole market. You know, together, imagine 50p maybe. Anyway, no, I always say to people that I feel like the idea of being a writer as a profession, I completely agree with Erica. I don't think I fully grasped it as a possibility. Obviously, I knew people did do it, but that didn't mean people like me could do it. And I knew that I could write, but it also felt kind of this is going to sound odd, I think, but sort of slightly dangerous, as in if I tried to write, it was sort of like the last trick in the bag. So I studied human resources and organizational psychology, and I had a corporate career because that's the sort of thing that normal people do. And it means that you can make money and, you know, have a family and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, to write felt like the last trick in the bag. If I tried to write properly and I failed, then it was like, then I'd used up all my possibly secret talents and I was depleted, and that would be it. And it just felt a bit scary, actually, to kind of properly think about writing as a job and actually properly exploring it. Because there is, you know, and I'm sure Erica would attest to this too, there's such vulnerability in actually putting your creative work out there for judgment and assessment. And, you know, is it publishable? Is it not? Yeah. And so writing sort of fell into my lap in a way, because I had resigned from a job in human resources. So I was the HR director for a massive business in Macau, China, and I'd resigned from that job, and the only other kind of work I could realistically get was HR, human resources work in another similar company. So I didn't take that option, and I just started to write as a personal project. And that manuscript that I ended up writing became the first novel I had published, which was The Colour of Tea, by Pan Macmillan. So it was just, a series of fortunate events, I guess, that led to that. And probably the fact that I didn't have very many other options if I wanted to exit the human resources world, and the fact that it was kind of a whim felt like a little bit less pressure. Yeah, so I think I sort of tricked myself into it slightly.
Yeah, it's hard to, when you've built up a career to be in a really senior role, it must be hard to step away from that, to visualise yourself as something so completely different.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a full circle back to being much more the kind of person I was as a kid. So I think the corporate career was more of a diversion from my authentic self. So to come back to it feels great. Although, as I say, like, it is vulnerable and it is hard and it doesn't pay much and it's quite a slog and all of those things. But the content of the work feels very aligned. And then in terms of kids' books or writing for children, the first time I had a go at that was with an orphanage that was based in Macau, where I was living. And they had an origin story that I thought would be amazing as a picture book. And so that's something that I worked on. And that book was self-published, and it was used as a fundraising tool and a gift to donors who donated Cradle of Hope, which is the name of the orphanage. And then, it wasn't really until Erica and I fortuitously met at the school gate that I started thinking about sort of writing for kids. Yeah, it sort of all came together. So I don't know if you know that story very well. Do you know that story very well, about how Erica and I started to...
No, and that just super excited me, because frequently when writers and illustrators are on the podcast, it is the first time they've ever met. And so, which blows my mind.
Seriously? Well, I guess, because if it's a publisher...
They've just emailed or whatever, or they've never actually had a conversation. So this is very exciting that you know each other.
Yeah.
Please tell me.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, Erica knows me very, very well and sees me all the time.
Yeah, not unfortunately at all. I think it's what makes what we do work so well. And I think our book is testament to that. I mean, it could have gone totally the other way. I don't know. Yes. It could have been the worst book ever.
Could have been a disaster.
Yeah.
I don't think it is. Anyway, you say the beginning. You explain the beginnings, because it was yours to start with, Hannah.
Okay, I'll start, and then I'm going to pass over to you. Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ready.
This is how we work, Lucy. We're a team. So when I was holidaying somewhere. I was holidaying down in Queenstown, which is in the South Island of New Zealand, and I saw this pack. It was like a spy adventure for kids that they could take around Queenstown and solve the clues, and kind of a little family adventure. And I thought, that's so cool. We could do something like that in the suburb where we live, the neighbourhood where we live, which is Devonport. And we could use a lot of the historical buildings and information that's, it's quite an old, well, for New Zealand, it's an old village. And we could do it as a fundraising project for the primary school where my daughters go to school. And so designed this thing and was trying to find somebody to work on it with me as an illustrator and designer. And Erica had very stupidly illustrated another fundraising project for the primary school. And so I saw it and got really excited and stalked her mercilessly and figured out who she was and like where she lived and, the names of her ex-boyfriends and whatnot. And got in touch and said, do you want to get involved in this? And I had this idea of a family trail, all very lo-fi. And Erica completely elevated the whole thing because she said, with her background at Usborne, she said, what if we make it a family trail around Devonport and an activity book? And we could also put an A3 map. So the product by the end was the most beautiful, you can still purchase it, product with an A3 map of the village, with the walking trail on it, a sealed section for the answer to the whole mystery. It's called the Great Devonport History Mystery, and a little branded pencil in the package as well, all sort of cello wrapped.
Gorgeous.
It is absolutely gorgeous. And as part of that, Erica had designed this little detective dog character.
Well, I should interject just there to say it was originally a cat. Can you imagine? It would have been a totally different story. So the cat quite quickly became a dog because I was like, of course it's got to be a dog. He sniffs out the clues.
Dogs are better than cats.
Agree.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're talking to
Lost
a cat
half the listeners
owner.
I'm on your side, Lucy.
So yeah, he became Detective Stanley. So he is the protagonist of the Devonport History Mystery. And at that point, he had a little sidekick of a pilwakawaka, which is a little New Zealand bird with a fantail, and they flit about, and they're absolutely gorgeous. And he had this little, I guess he was like Watson at that point. He had a little bowler hat, this bird. And those two characters were the guys that took you around the trail of the history mystery of Devonport. And yeah, I interrupted your story. Did you have something else to add, Hannah, before I take it over?
I was going to pass over to you to say what happened next.
Well, what happened next was we loved working on that so much, and it turned out so nicely. It had real vintage vibe. I used a very limited colour palette. Stanley was all yellow, black and white. And so the whole thing just looks like sort of an activity book of, I don't know, the 50s or something, which is, it kind of felt like it fitted that sort of mystery detective novel of that genre. And we love working on that so much that I was like, well, should we keep going? Why don't we take this character and make a bigger activity book, and we'll think about self-publishing ourselves or thinking about what we're going to do once we've got a bit more of a product. So we decided to stick with the theme because we worked with the Devonport Museum to kind of get our facts for the history mystery. We were like, well, let's go a bit bigger. Why don't we talk to the Auckland Museum and see what we can find out there? So we went and met with the conservator team at the Auckland Museum and went behind the scenes and found out about how they preserve bugs and what special glues they use. And we got very, very excited about that. And so we started the same process of how we created the history mystery, with the idea that we would have a series of clues that would lead the child all the way through the book, and unless you answered all of the questions, you wouldn't be able to get your answer, because each page would unveil a letter which would spell out a secret clue at the end, and it was going to have a sealed section again. And the idea was that it kind of makes like activity books sort of, you want to achieve it all rather than just dipping in and maybe like doing one page and then giving up on it. It was supposed to be an incentive to go all the way through the book.
Love that.
So we started that, and we'd gotten a fair way in, probably a quarter of the way through the book with a whole book plan set out. And it's like, I feel like we've got enough now. We had enough of the book mapped out. I'd done about 3 or 4 colour spreads. I had a cover for it. So it was called Detective Stanley and the Mystery at the Museum. And I said to Hannah, we'd actually gone down the road of thinking about how we could self-publish and realised it was just going to be way too hard and probably for not much gain. And especially not if we were to just publish here in New Zealand, because we were a small market. So we had all of this beautiful content, but sat for a couple of weeks just thinking, oh, we've made all this, now what are we going to do? And then I just thought, well, you know what? I mean, I stalk all of the publishers all the time anyway, the ones that I really like. And I love Flying Eye Books, and I love their aesthetic, and I love the illustrators that they use and how cool the stories are. And I was like, I mean, this would be dream scenario, but don't get your hopes up, Hannah, because it's probably not likely. But why don't we do it? Because we've got this book, so let's go for it. So we put together kind of a pitch for our book and included everything that we had and sent it off. And I got this is nighttime, New Zealand time, so then we go to bed. And then I get a very excited text message from Hannah the next morning going, they've replied!
The next day?
Yes.
Wow.
They've replied! And I was like, what? I hadn't even looked at my emails yet. What are you talking about? And Sam had got.
I was at her window, actually. I was just like, at her window. Hello, good morning.
Why aren't you up yet? Waiting for me to respond. And Sam Arthur at Flying Eye had gotten back to us, and it was all a series of coincidences, I think. They'd apparently had an acquisitions meeting just earlier that week where they'd had a discussion about how they didn't have a detective and they needed a detective for their...
And then the one landed.
And then a detective...
One landed in their inbox.
Landed in their inbox. And he said, look, it's great, kind of like what you've done, but Flying Eye do not do activity books. It's not something we publish. It's not something we specialise in marketing or anything. So it's not something we would take as it is, but we're really interested in his character. Do you think you could turn it into a story, specifically for our younger kind of graphic novel series, which they call graphic readers, for 6 to 9 year olds? Here's some other stuff we've done. Do you want to give it a go? And we said, yes, that sounds great. And there's like another email back. Can you do it in about 3 weeks so it reaches our next acquisitions meeting? Okay. Then in the background, me going to Hannah, can you write a book in 3 weeks?
And can you write a book in 3 weeks?
She can write a book in 3 weeks, apparently.
If put under immense pressure, yes, it seems as though I
think she wrote a book in a week and a half, actually, because I had then the other week and a half to put together something for it. But I think we had to do something. Did we have to do like 12 roughs and like a whole page, a page plan for the whole book? Yes. 12 roughs and a couple of 3 colour spreads. Could we do that?
Wow.
I think it might have been nearly 4, but it was definitely not long. And we did it. And
how exciting.
We sent that off and they liked it. And so that's how Detective Stanley became not just a little village detective anymore. He became a London detective. A world detective.
That's brilliant. I love that story. For people who don't know, Hannah, can you just introduce the book, give a little bit of a synopsis of the story? My children really loved it. It has been very popular in my house, but can you give listeners a bit of an intro?
I would love to. Yeah, I think as Erica said, it was really exciting for us to be considering a graphic reader, which I didn't really fully understand until we kind of came into this world. How unique they are and how great they are for such a wide range of kids in terms of ages and in terms of interest in reading, because you do have the narrative, the story, as well as comic dialogue. So in comics, obviously the whole story is told through dialogue and through the images, whereas with a graphic reader you do have a story like a picture book. You do have some text above and below the sort of comic sections as well. So it's a really, really nice blend, and I think it's so accessible for so many different types of kids. So the first thing I would say is, like Erica said, Detective Stanley and the Mystery at the Museum is great for kids anywhere sort of, I think, between sort of 5 to 10, because kids can read it and it feels like a step up from picture books, but kids can also be read to. if they're at that age as well. So, it's about a crime-solving sleuth hound. So that's our detective Stanley. He is desperately trying to retire and enjoy pancake breakfasts. But
all detectives are trying to retire, aren't they?
Yes, they're all
just
trying to retire.
Trying to give up.
It is an occupational hazard that they try to retire and somebody's always dragging them back in. So poor Stanley is trying to retire and eat his pancake breakfast, and he gets interrupted by a mystery to solve at the local Gnarly Bone Museum. So it includes a very perplexing art heist where there doesn't seem to be anything stolen, but actually there might be something stolen. Some disguises, forgery, and also some wrongful imprisonment. And at the back of the book there are some artifacts to enjoy and loads of Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes references throughout. And what we really hoped to give readers and sort of adult buyers and child readers was this kind of almost vintage, like you feel as though it should have been written before because there's so many kind of tropes and cliches.
Yeah, exactly.
But it fits into that. Yeah, it fits into that sort of literary legacy of, old-fashioned mystery stories, whether it's Poirot or Sherlock Holmes or Nancy Drew or even Famous Five, like Erica was talking about, us growing up with. It fits into that and kind of builds on that heritage. And the look of it is very nostalgic as well. So, we're very conscious that we have multiple audiences. We've got the kids who read it, we've got the parents who buy it, we've got the teachers who engage with it, and the librarians. And so we really wanted to give something to all of those audiences that was like fun and warm and engaging.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I know one of the features of one of the ways in which reading for pleasure can manifest in children and adults, the same in humans of any age, is the pleasure of that kind of intellectual pleasure of like solving a problem. And that's what people get from mysteries. And definitely I observed my children and also felt myself like because there's an opportunity for you to be slightly ahead of Stanley, isn't there? As you're reading it, you can see things, you can see the clues and that kind of pleasure of being slightly smarter than Stanley, although he's obviously very clever.
Obviously.
Honestly.
I think you're right. I think it's that pantomime thing too, where it's like, he's behind you.
Yeah.
We enjoy
exactly.
that. There's no age that doesn't enjoy that, I don't think.
And since it's been out here, because it's only just come out in New Zealand a few weeks ago, so we've had our book launch this week for it, and so we've had lots of new readers with parents that we might know or through other parents. We've had feedback, and I've had some lovely videos sent of me of children's reactions to different things on the pages. Like, for example, there's a prison scene where you kind of get a cross section of all the little animals in their cells and what they're up to. On the prior page, there was an escapee, a little wolf has escaped out of a window, and one of my friend's daughters was just delighted that when she turned up, she'd seen the wolf climbing out of the window, and when she turned the next page, she discovered the window of which he'd broken out. So it's those little things that I just sort of like had just, that seemed obvious to me, but has caused like real delight in the reader. And I think what's also nice is children are going back and then rereading it again. And because you can unravel some things, some clues earlier on if you hadn't already caught them, now when you read it a second time and you spot those things, the child is so delighted. They feel like a detective themselves. So that, I didn't notice that the first time, and look, we could have worked out the case sooner if we'd have seen this. So it's really nice.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And how did it work between? So after you did this mad 3-week hustle to get the first deadline, then presumably then you had a little bit more time.
Yeah. And
as you were already working on this really collaboratively, and was it less? Typically with people that I've spoken to, it's kind of like the book's written and then it goes, and then the illustrations are done. Were you a lot more in communication?
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
How did it kind of work?
Well, it's evolved, because with the first one, Hannah just wrote the text. It was amazing. I was just blown away because I could see in my head how it was going to work already. So I got very excited about it. I could start to imagine how it might work. And for me, this is the first sort of comic book type book I've ever created. So I wasn't quite sure in my head how we were going to tackle those bits where we needed text and then like intro text and then speech bubbles. Hannah had mapped it out how she thought it could work, but it was like a case of sort of getting inside Hannah's head to get inside my own head to figure out how that would work on a page. So it was a case of I think I just then dealt with it like I would any book that I'm given from an editor and told to lay out. Like my job as book designer just kicked in and figured out how Hannah's words would work across 64 pages. Because I don't think you'd broken it down on that first one, had you? I don't think at that point you were like thinking this page could have this on. I think you'd written it as a story.
I remember writing it as a story, but then I remember breaking it down into kind of what it could look like. And then I gave Erica this really horrible document where I had actually drawn, like, here's a panel and da-da-da, and this is a mouse, and, like, it was just hideous, you know. But it was, like, on the page at least, kind of. And like Erica said, that has evolved. For the second one that we have written, is almost kind of in the bag, I created a table where I had, this is the speech that goes on the page, this is the speech that goes in the dialogue bubbles, this is what I'm thinking of for the page, you know, whether it's 3 panels or it's da-da-da-da. And then, as you said, Lucy, it's so collaborative and we just bounce backwards and forwards with each other. Erica's husband's got a background in advertising, so he's also can be really useful in terms of imagining things as storyboards and having that sort of visual overview. And yeah, we just kind of keep going until it is working, you know, or we'll try things and then go, that's not working. So it was really important for us that we worked on everything together and we go backwards and forwards. We do absolutely have our own skill set, which is great. And I just so admire Erica's work. So there's this real like mutual respect, and somehow we have this like shared vision that is just so aligned. It's crazy, actually. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, you know, like the other day we were talking about the kind of animal that one of the villains should be. And I was saying to a friend of mine, I was like, God, we had the funniest conversation about, do you think they should be mice? I don't know. What about weasels? You know, and we were just, and I was like, this is the best work conversation ever. I was just having the absolute time of my life.
And we're also good at taking criticism from each other. Not that we often have to do it, because I think we just both respect that each person has what their skill set is, and so you trust them with it and you run with it. But equally, like, I'll send stuff over to Hannah and go, do you think this is working? Like, you be honest, is there anything you would change? And I want her to, and she does tell me when things aren't working, and then I take that criticism and we'll make it into something better. And I think it's really important to be able to do that, because that's what makes the work good. So yeah, it's not being you can't be shy about saying something doesn't work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think what makes it work so well is that I know for sure, and I think Erica knows for sure too, that our intention is to make it as good as it can be. So it's criticism only for the sake of betterment. Like, and we're both, we love kids' books so much, and we love graphic readers and graphic novels so much that we want it to be like the best it can be. And we're so driven by that. So yeah, it's always delivered and received knowing that intention.
Yeah, there's also a lot of trust there.
It doesn't have to happen very often though. I honestly, Hannah's writing just comes in and I go, yeah, nailed it. And then I think most of the time I get it right back. So
you
it's
do. Yeah, you do. Yeah, and it is like we say, this kind of shared vision of it. It's like, yeah, that's what I was seeing in my mind. It's great.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. And in terms of the visual style, is that very similar to that original
It is
plan
really
for the activity?
really,
how did you settle on that? It seems it's really distinctive. I think it's
I was going to try and get it. Not that it would work very well for a podcast for me to show you a cover, but it hasn't strayed too far away from that. Apart from it obviously went more colourful because I was working in a very limited colour palette. What has changed is that he's very 2D anyway. It's a very flat world.
Yeah, it's cool.
But he was even flatter before because I'd never ever seen him from not this angle. Like, it was just an eye I'm doing side profile here. So just an eye and his little snout. And he can't always be sideways, can he? So then I had to figure out how to draw him from the front when he looked very strange to start with, because taking that 2D flatness and then figuring out, well, what's he going to look like when you can see both eyes and his nose straight on? And what's his hat going to look like? So it took a few attempts to kind of like figure out how he works in a more 3D world, even though he is still very flat. So he hasn't changed much. His outfit is exactly the same. He still wears his little yellow stripy trousers and his deerstalker hat and his little cape and his little dress shoes. Always looks impeccable. And then as for the rest of the world, it was a bit of back and forth with Flying Eye at the beginning to just get that right, because I'd use a kind of like more of a retro kind of dotty texture on him for the history mystery. And that's all gone in this book, and it just relies on kind of its pure colour and the beautiful texture of the paper. So it's kind of advice to sort of like steer away a little bit from using textures, because it's really not required. It's going to look amazing once it's on paper. So it was kind of working with them to make sure I got the colour palette right. And my colour palette right from the beginning was thinking of things like Wes Anderson colour palettes. It just felt right, and those kind of cross-section sort of views of things that we get are very much inspired by his films. And then Paddington 2, all of the prisons, my favourite movie, all of the prison scenes in that were really good inspiration for how
I live in the town where the creator of Paddington was born. And we just had our statue stolen. It's been very big news. I'm not sure if it's reached your shores.
I was shocked. They ripped
That's my town. They ripped and people were leaving. They had like a little CSI tent over the bench when his statue was stolen, and people left marmalade and marmalade sandwiches on the bench for weeks until he came back.
Oh no!
Local pigeons were thrilled.
Is he back in place?
He's just come back. He's just last week. Delighted to tell you, Paddington was returned. Wow! And because the judge, and when the people were sentenced who did it, these two drunken people from the RAF, the judge said that their behaviour was the antithesis of everything Paddington stood for.
Completely.
Which is why
I feel like I'm watching CNN right now.
Well, the people of Newbury have been shook to their core by this event. Right. So he's back. Delighted to say.
That's like your mum saying, "I'm very disappointed in you." It's like, this is the antithesis of everything Paddington stands for.
Yeah, exactly. So we've just got a few more questions before we wrap up. But Erica, I wanted to talk to you because we're talking about the kind of journey of a book, and there are roles which I don't really understand in publishing, and
I still don't.
Designer is one of them. So, and I know when I was speaking to the team at Flying Eye, they were saying that it was quite unusual for an illustrator to also be the book designer on a project. So I just, can you explain what that means?
I didn't really know that, but that's because that's always been, I was a designer first before I was an illustrator. So the two kind of just go hand in hand for me. And when I was working at Usborne, I was often working on titles, the activity book type titles, where I would design and put them together and work collaboratively with other illustrators as well. So I'd be designing for them, but then there would be spreads that I would just illustrate myself. So in my head, are kind of like how things end up on the page always start with where the words will go or how they will be laid out, and making sure that it's really super readable. Like the text needs to be in the right place, otherwise the reader won't understand what they're doing or where they should be going.
Especially with younger readers, where they're just really learning how to navigate that page.
Yeah, so it's really important that words start up in the top left corner and they really gradually work down the page. And if they're going to end up in the bottom right, it's got to be sequential. It can't suddenly hop backwards, because otherwise you won't know where to go. So for me, that was all part of like how I was going to figure out the illustrations, was the words were put on the page first. So that we could make sure between me and Hannah, like even before there were pictures on the page, the words and the speech bubbles went on the page, so we could see that the leading text into those speech bubbles would work, that the characters having those conversations would work, and that the story would make sense. So that all came before the characters even ended up on the page. And that then made it easier for me to figure out how many frames I might use per trying to tell the story. There aren't too many in whereas in maybe a normal comic book, you might suddenly get these frame after frame of no text, and you're just sort of led to kind of like what's happening in the story through the image. But I think because these are for younger readers, and because we are going to assume that they may be being read to first with them, I know reading those comic books with my daughter that actually it's very hard to read something that's maybe only got sound effects or nothing going on. You have to then describe the picture to then sort of describe for it to make sense with the words that follow. So we had to kind of make sure that we didn't have too many frames on each page to make sure young readers would understand it, and that we were always maybe partly explaining what was in that image, even if sometimes it's probably quite obvious, but just so that it told the story in a nice fluid way. Can't really imagine the other way round, where it's sort of like designed for somebody and then just given to you as the illustrator, especially if the illustrator sort of had the concept for the whole book. I'm interested to know how it works in their head. I only know my way, which is, I guess, the designer in me. Do everything.
Do everything as Erica's way.
Micromanage every single element.
Complete control. It's really interesting for me to find out all of this and then kind of go back and think about how, to find out about the way that it worked and how collaborative it was. And now I want to go back and read it again now and see if, with that knowledge, and see, kind of almost imagine the decisions that you've made along the way. So I'll definitely be doing that after we finished recording. Go back and look at it again with fresh eyes, thinking of you two, working away on it. So I think you've kind of hinted, but are we going to see more Detective Stanley books in the future? So I think you said you've already got one done.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a 3-book deal with Flying Eye. The second book is done. The third book is pretty well met. Not done. It's not done. But we
know what it is.
Beautiful cover for it, and we do know the sort of basic trajectory of the story, and the characters
really
within it. Yeah. I'm excited about it too. I'm excited about that one too. So it's great because he's just not made for just one book. He
could just keep going.
He just can't retire. He can't retire.
The next one is called Detective Stanley and the Green Thumb Thief, and it's set at the Marylebone Botanical Gardens, and a very special, precious plant may or may not have gone missing. So it's all based. So Stanley's called in again to go and sort it out. So that one was, I would say, really fun to illustrate, but I don't know if it was. I had to draw so many plants. So many plants.
You need to agree these things. Right, you've got no excuse.
Greenhouse.
You've made your own problems.
This is the other great thing about having this collaboration. I think there was some character. Anyway, I think this character should be an X animal, and Erica was like, I'm not going to keep drawing that animal. No, I was like, okay, we'll just change it. We'll make it a mongoose or whatever it was.
So why I have particular, aversions to some animals and not others. It might be just because I don't think I could draw them.
Yeah, exactly.
But then I've had to draw some very odd animals for these books that I've probably never drawn before. So, you learn to draw them.
We can sort of help make life a little bit easier for each other, I think, which is nice. But yes, more Detective Stanley to come, 100%.
Very exciting. I think he's also lends himself to merch. I want to see.
Yeah, me too.
Range of merch.
Me too.
Yeah.
Let's get that sorted, please.
Excellent.
Okay, so the final question on the podcast is always, if listeners were to add one comic or book about comics, if you like, to our to-be-read piles tomorrow, what would you recommend we read? Something that you've read recently that you've enjoyed that you'd
I have got, it's not a graphic novel as such, but it's in that, I'm going to hold it up because I've got it right here. Okay. It's called Myths and Monsters and Mayhem in Ancient Greece. So it's a non-fiction book by James Davies, by Big Picture Press, and I love it. Having just watched Chaos on Netflix with all the Greek.
Oh, yeah.
This was actually, I went back to this after that because it explained it all, because it's all of the Greek stories in comic book format, and they're only a couple of pages each one, but it's so well done, and the illustrations are just incredible. So I think it fits in that comic world, even though it's a non-fiction book. So that's my recommendation.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Hannah, have you got one for us?
Oh, I think that listeners should absolutely rush out and buy Detective Stanley and the Mystery of the Museum.
Of course.
Excellent plug.
Yeah. What can I say? Just, the best of the best.
Yeah, I would second that. I think it's really beautifully produced, a really distinctive look and feel to when you read it as well, like that story. So yeah, I would definitely. And I think it does like that, feels like this really important gap in this transition time of reading as well.
I think it's quite exciting, isn't it? Because it fits what everybody's telling us that children's reading is not where it should be, and that in order to get more children reading, books need to be shorter and more engaging,
accessible.
And I just think this series of books is really spot on. It's got a bit of everything, and it's gonna be perfect for those children that are maybe struggling a bit with their reading, or they're not, and they just want to look at something that looks really cool. But I think absolutely that shorter format comic is really accessible.
Yeah, agree. Completely. I just think, and it's just such an exciting time, and what a great thing to be able to access in these times of confusion and strife and the world gone slightly mad, to be able to dive into these worlds.
Lose yourself in a story.
Yeah.
What a brilliant note to end on. Thank you so much. Thanks for giving up your time talking to me, and thanks for making this brilliant book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to Hannah and Erica for joining me. I don't normally let people get away with recommending their own book, but what can I say? I was charmed. I was charmed by Hannah. I let her get away with it. My recommendation this week is going to be Unicorn Boy by Dave Roman. I was really surprised by this book. I didn't know what to expect, and I was just laughing out loud right from the outset. It's really witty. The characters in it are just really funny, full of one-liners, kind of smart, sarcastic humour. It's a great story of a boy who one day just suddenly grows a horn on his head and finds out that he's got special powers and becomes Unicorn Boy. But he's a bit of a reluctant hero, it's fair to say. Just a really great tale, very, very witty. And I'm delighted to say, when I was just looking up, just checking my details before I gave it as a recommendation, I came across the cover to be announced for Unicorn Boy 2. So also going to be a series, it looks like. And I'm not surprised, because just, the character quality is really, it's right there, and the humour, absolutely loved it. That's been one of my standout titles that I've read this year, I think, actually. So huge recommendation for me. In terms of Detective Stanley, really love that book. I love this idea of a kind of hybrid text between comic and picture book, although I think it's quite a publishery type term, and I would say that Detective Stanley is a comic. It's a really, really well-told story. I would say for those very early readers who are just maybe still not as secure as they could be on their alternate sounds for phonics, some of the language is quite hard. So I would agree with Hannah that it is a great book to share for children who are at that very early stage, just because they might stumble on some of the words they come across, things like audience and that sort of thing. A little bit higher level of language in there, but that's great. We shouldn't oversimplify for children. We should be there to support them on their reading journey so that they can access the books that they need. I absolutely love it. And huge fan of Detective Stanley, and can't wait to read more of them and share more of them with my own children as well. Coming up in the next episode will be the second half of this two-parter, where we look a bit more about the commercial side of bringing a book to publication. So I was really inspired by this quote by Barbara Bader. It's from 1976 in a book called American Picture Books, From Noah's Ark to the Beast Within. And it defines picture books in this way, and I'm applying it to comics as well, because I just think it really sums up all the different forces at play when books are getting into our hands. A picture book is a text, illustrations, total design, an item of manufacture and a commercial product, a social, cultural, historical document, and foremost an experience for a child. As an art form, it hinges on the interdependence of pictures and words, on the simultaneous display of two facing pages, and on the drama of the turning page. And I just think that's a brilliant encapsulation of what it is to read a book with illustrations, and also an acknowledgement that there's not complete creative freedom within that. There also is a process of business influencing what we have access to as well. So I thought that was really interesting. It's one of the things that inspired me to want to dig a little bit into that more commercial side too. So that is coming up on the next episode, and the Flying Eye team are absolutely delightful, lovely guests. So it's a brilliant episode coming up. As you know, this episode has been sponsored by ALCS. So thank you, ALCS, for sponsoring us. ALCS support over 120,000 members to collect money for all the secondary uses of their work, photocopies, digital reproductions, even use in education. And they also produce some fantastic resources to support educators to explore topics like copyright and plagiarism in the classroom. And you can access those through the link on the show notes, which takes you to their website. There's a range of different free resources for teachers available on the site, and there's lots of really interesting things I picked out last week, so I'll just give it a plug again before we move on to something else next week. But there's an AI, poetry and copyright resource around National Poetry Day there to dig into both a primary and a secondary version. So that's worth checking out. And huge thanks, as always, because without ALCS, the cost of producing the podcast would not be covered. So a huge thank you to them. And thank you to those of you who found the pod on Blue Sky. It's great to have a new place to hang out on social media. So we are still on X on Lucy_Braidley. You can find the podcast on Instagram at comic_boom_podcast. And now you can find Comic Boom Podcast on Blue Sky as well. You can also find me, Lucy Starbuck Braidley, on LinkedIn. I also share about the upcoming podcast episodes on there too. And it's delightful to be connected with everyone who's listening to the podcast. So much love out there for the Jamie Smart episode last week. So thank you for that. As I said at the beginning, we're going to do 5 episodes, then have a bit of a break over the summer and do another 5 episodes in the autumn this year. So the next episode will be the last one of this little block. And we're going to have a week gap. We're going to have a gap for half term because I'm going on holiday. I want to be, much as I love the podcast, I am going to not take my laptop and microphone on holiday with me. I am just going to go and have a nice time. So there might be a little bit of a delay before the next episode comes out and you hear from the Flying Eye team, but it'd be worth the wait because they are brilliant. So thank you everyone out there for listening, for supporting the podcast, for sharing with your colleagues and your network. It's always appreciated. You've been listening to Comic Boom, which is produced and hosted by me, Lucy Starbuck Braidley. Thanks for listening.